All right, my name is CJ. Thank you all for sticking around to the end to watch vanilla JavaScript. This is going to be so much fun. Before we get into this, I would all like us to close our eyes. We're gonna do a quick thought experiment. All right, close your eyes. Okay, you're stranded on a desert island. All you have is vanilla JavaScript. A millionaire lands his helicopter and he's like, "Hey, if you build the app that runs my mansion resort that I'm about to build with vanilla JavaScript, I'll give you $1 million. Open your eyes. Could you do it? Could you do it? After this, maybe you could. But that's really why I'm doing this. So honestly, like Vue Js is my favorite framework, and I probably would have done it in this. Vue is awesome. But I'm doing it in vanilla just to show kind of like what's happening under the hood in a lot of these frameworks. Cool. So when you think vanilla, maybe you think like jQuery or DOM manipulation or something like that, but I'm actually going to code this in the style of model view controller. So we're actually going to have data binding. We're going to have templates. It's going to be amazing, all in 20 minutes. All right, to build this app, we're going to need an app. We're going to need a component. A component is going to have a model, a view, and a controller. We're going to need a router. We're going to need an API, all the same things that everyone else used, but we're going to write it from scratch. No wires, all from scratch. No frameworks. Let's do this. All right. Okay, we're gonna write some code. Now, what I have, I'm gonna take this off. So, I have the basic HTML set up because I'm gonna write JavaScript. Don't care about HTML, but let's go ahead and start this up. I'm going to use light server. It's an auto-refreshing server. And so by default, we kind of start off where everyone else was. We got our header. We got the main area of the app. But let's write some JavaScript. So what I'm going to do right at the bottom of the body is I'm going to pull in a script tag. And I'm going to make an app folder, and I'm going to create a main.js. Now, one of the things you're going to see me do is called consume first development. So like I said, there are no wires. Everything that I write and every method that I call, I have to actually write. But you're going to see me call that method or call that class before it even exists. So just like I'm pulling this JavaScript file in before it exists. So let's create a folder. We'll call it app. Inside this folder, we'll create a file and call it main.js. And inside of here, I need an app. So I'm going to create an app variable and set it equal to the instance of an app. But I don't have an app yet. I'll have to create it. But when we create an app, we're going to tell it what the root element is, just like you would in any other framework. So right here, I'm going to say your root is on the element with the ID app. So over here on my HTML, on my main, I'm going to give it an ID of app. Wonderful. How can we make this work? We need an app class. We need to be able to create an instance of an app. So right here in app, not in that, in app, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this lib. Lib is short for library. This is really like any sort of reusable code. So this app is technically reusable. So inside of here, I'm going to create app.js. And here, I'm just going to have a class called app. Now, when I created the instance of the app, I passed in the selector. So this is the thing that's going to be the element that our app is going to exist on. So right inside of the constructor, I'm going to create a property on the instance of the app called app_element. And that is going to be document.querySelector. And we'll pass in the selector that we passed in. This is pretty much the only DOM manipulation that I'm going to be doing is setting the element. Everything else is going to work very similar to how you see it in frameworks and such. Awesome. So I've got myself an app. Our very first story is to, as a lonely dog, I want to see a list of all the dogs that are available so that I can see my dating options. So to do this, I'm going to create a dogs component. So this is going to be a component that represents the list of all the dogs. So over here on my main, I'm going to add a component to the app. So I'm going to say app.addComponent. This is just going to be an object of options, and I'm going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it dogs. Now our component is going to have MVC, Model View Controller. So if we think about what we've seen tonight, the dogs component, its model has a dogs array, right? So the component here, the dogs array, that represents the data, which represents the view. So this component is also going to have a view property. And what I'm going to make the view is going to be a function that takes in the model, and then it just returns an HTML string that represents that view with the model. So right now, it's going to be a very simple view. It's just going to say there are, and then I'm going to throw a template literal. I'm going to say model.dogs dogs.length. Dogs. So initially, when we actually see this component, it's going to say there are 0 dogs because the array is empty. Wonderful. But what I need to happen is whenever the app loads up, I actually want to load this component. I want to show it right there. So for that, I'm going to use a router. So let's create a router. So right down here, I'm going to say const router equals new router. And I'm going to pass the app into the router so the router knows how to switch out components. So do that. And then I'm also going to actually add a route to the router. So I'm going to say router.addRoute. And in this case, I'm going to specify the name of the component I want to route to. So in this case, I'm going to say dogs, go to the dogs component. And here I'll specify the URL that when we see that URL, we should go to this specific component. Now this, I'm actually going to use a regular expression. I'll show it for now. When we see that URL #/dogs, that's when we want to see this component. But to make it a regular expression, I'll say it must begin with that and it must end with that. So when the router sees this specific URL, please load the dogs component. Awesome. Now I need a router. So in my lib folder, I'm going to create a file, call it router.js. I'm going to create a class called router. The router accepts an app as a parameter, and we're just going to put it on the instance of the router. So this.app equals app. And we had that method addRoute. So addRoute accepts the name of the component and the URL. And we want to store this route inside of the router so that way when the URL changes, we can find that specific route. So right here, I'm going to push into a routes array a simple object that has a name and a URL. But you're wondering, where is this routes URL? No wires, right? No wires. This.routes is an empty array. So we initialize it as nothing. Each route we add is going to get pushed into this array. Awesome. But now we want to tap into when the URL changes. So when the URL changes, let's load this route. Well, the browser has this handy-dandy thing built in called #change. So I'm going to add an event listener to the window called #change. And when that event happens, I want to run a function inside of my router. So I'm going to say this.hashChange. So down here, I need a #change function, so #change. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. Yes, push into the routes array. But this #change function, this is just going to get called. Right now, I'm just going to log window.location. So we can see what the actual URL is when the route changes. I need to bring the router into my HTML and the app and everything else. Everything's broken right now. So let's bring in our app. And we'll also bring in our router. App, lib, router. Beautiful. OK, and then the last thing is, so when I click on the header, I actually want this to load the dogs route. So let's see this in action. App.addComponent is not a function. OK, we can't see it in action yet. We need to implement addComponent on the app. So if we go over to app, we'll implement addComponent. This will accept the component. And for the app itself, I'm just going to have an object with all of the components inside of it with their name as a key. So it's going to be an object. So I'll say this.componentsByName, and that's going to be an object. And then whenever we add a component, I'm going to say this.componentsByName at component.name equals the component. Wonderful. OK, so at least that exists. No errors. But now when I click this, we see the location log. So we're tapping into location changed. And you'll notice the URL changed up here. So the location changed. Window.location gives us lots of information, like where we are, what our host is, what our origin is. But it has this handy-dandy hash value. And we can use that to find the route that matches this hash and show that component. So let's do that. So in our router, right about here, we need to find the component that matches that URL. So I'm going to store the hash in a variable, so window.location.hash. And right here, I need to find that route. So I'm just going to filter on the route. So I'm going to say const route equals this.routes.filter. And I want to find the route where the hash matches a regular expression with the route's URL. And I want to grab the first one. So if it's going to iterate over every route that I have. If at any point it matches the URL, I get that route back. So here I'll just log out the route. Now, I could just run this code, but what's going to happen is this event listener is actually bound to the this of the window and not of the instance. So I'm going to go ahead and bind hash change so we don't run into that. So right here, I'm going to say this.hashChange is this.hashChange.bind this. So when the event gets invoked by the window, this method will have the this of the router, and this.routes will be an actual thing. So we'll come over here, we'll refresh it to nothing. When we click on that, we actually get the route. So the route has a name and a URL. Wonderful. Now let's show that component and now that we've found that route. So we found the route. I'll just do some quick validation. So I'll say like if route, if we did find it, I'm going to say this.app.show component. And here we're going to pass in the route.name because I found the route. I need to tell the app, hey, here's this, the URL just changed. Please load the component with this name. So we'll do that. If there was no route, I'll just call show component with nothing, and we'll display like a not found or something like that. Cool. So now I need show component in my app. So right after add component, I'm going to say show component. It's going to take the name of the component. I'm going to create an instance variable called current component, and I'm going to set that equal to this.components by name at the name. So we'll grab that component based on its name. And then I want to update the view now that I know what the current component is. So right here, I'm going to say this.update view. Cool. So now we need an update view function. So update view is simply going to set the HTML of the app element. So right here, I'm going to say this.appElement.inner HTML equals this.currentComponent.view, right? Because the view is a function, so we invoke it. And then we need to pass in the model. So this.currentComponent, you pass in the model, and nothing. No, so one thing is, so when the page loads, the hash change actually doesn't kick in. So what we can do is we can say, when the DOM content loads, check the hash change and load that component. So let's just do that. In our router, right about here, we'll say DOM content loaded. And now, boom, there are 0 dogs. Sweet. So right now it's a very, very basic view, right? So there are 0 dogs. Now we want to actually get those dogs from the API, set them on the component, and this should say there are 3 dogs. Cool. Now to do that, I'm going to create an API class. So we're going to create an instance of it here. So const API equals new API. And we'll just create this in the lib folder. We'll call it api.js. This is going to be a class called API, and it's going to have an instance property called API URL, and that is going to be equal to this. Yeah, that. Bam. Okay, but this needs a function on it. We need to get the dogs. Just like Brooks, I'm going to use the built-in fetch method. So fetch is built into the browser. It's a beautiful thing, and we can make API requests with it. So we'll grab it. We'll then get back the result, and we'll turn that result into JSON. Wonderful. Now let's use this getDogs function inside of our component. So in main.js, we've got our view. We now need a controller. So just like the view function, this is my break timer. Everyone reach into the sky. Wonderful. Okay. So just like the view function accepts the model as an object, the controller is going to accept the model so that it can modify it, right? So we make the API request, we get back the data, and then we update the model with the latest data. So I'm going to say API, not that, API.getDogs, and then we should get back some result. And for now, we're just going to log that result. Cool. But now that we have this controller function, our app, whenever it shows a component, will actually call the controller function before updating the view. So over here on our app, right before we update the view, let's just make sure, we'll say if this.currentComponent is a thing, then we will say this.currentComponent.controller, and we're going to invoke that with our model from the current component. So that'll invoke the controller function. The controller function will make the API request, and we'll log the data out. Cool. Let's see it happen. API is not defined. Cool. we need to bring that into our index.html. So right here, I'm going to bring in a script with app/lib/API. Go. There we go. So we showed the component, the view loaded, the controller got invoked, it made the API request, and then we logged the data out to the console. Wonderful. Now that we have the data, we need to actually set it on our model. So right here, I could say model.dogs equals result.dogs. But if I do that, nothing's going to happen because I need to tell the view to update, right? And I know what you're thinking. We can simply just invoke app.updateView. And if we do that, it will update the view, right? It will say that we have 3 dogs. But I don't want to have to do that because I'm a lazy developer. So I'm going to implement data binding so that way when I modify the model, the view instantly updates. So let's do that. Over here in our app, when we add the component, I'm going to turn the model into a proxy. So a proxy is a new feature in ES 2015 that allows you to intercept property sets and property gets from an object. So what we can do is, whenever something changes on the model, instantly update the view. So let's do that. So I'll say component.model equals this.proxify the model. Component.model. And of course, I have to implement proxify. So how's that going to work? So proxify will accept a model, and it's going to return a new proxy. So the proxy accepts a target. So this is the object that it's going to watch for changes. And then it accepts an object full of handlers. So you can tap into when a property is getting set, when somebody's getting a property, basically any sort of modification that happens to the object, you can set a handler for it. The one that I care about is set. So set is going to give you the target, which is going to be the model itself, the property that's changing, and then the value that it's changing to. Set should return true if it updated the property, and now we'll actually update the property. So I'll say target at property equals value. That's great and all, but let's add a little log in here. So we can actually keep track of every change that happens to our model throughout our app. So I'll say changing property from, and we'll pass in a target at that property, to the new value. So now whenever we update a property, we get this log. So changing dogs from an empty array to a full array, right? So we can see every single change that happens to the model. Now, all we have to do is say this.updateView, this.updateView, and instantly it breaks. Okay, so the issue with that is the handler here is an actual function, so it's binding the value of this. So outside of here, we're just going to have to do the good old self equals this and do self.updateView. Beautiful. So now, no matter what we set on the model, the view will instantly update. Fantastic. Okay, so the view's updating. Now let's actually throw that dog template in there. So don't feel like writing HTML, so I'm just going to grab that template. You all forgive me, right? Cool. So, cool. So this is just going to be a simple function that accepts a dog and then returns an HTML string that represents that dog, right? So this is the same template you've seen everyone else use. But now in my view, instead of just saying there are models.length, I'm going to actually build up an HTML string with all of the dogs inside of it. So let's do that right here. So I'm going to say dogs HTML equals model.dogs.reduce. So we're going to reduce this array to a string. So this is going to give us HTML and each individual dog. We're going to return the HTML plus the dog template of that dog, and we start off with an empty string. Now I'm going to wrap this in an LI. Actually, we'll do this as a template string. Lots of ES 2015 happening right now. That, and wait, there. I can do it. Come on. Okay, so we've got a bunch of list items. Now we need to throw it into the view. So the view is simply just going to be an unordered list. So we're going to throw the UL. This is going to have a class of dogs provided by the wonderful Kyle Kerberly. Yes. And and right inside of the unordered list, I'm just going to throw in the dogs HTML. Are you guys ready to get excited? Because this is going to work. This is going to work. It's going to work so good. Oh, my God. Awesome. Beautiful, beautiful. So it's working. We're updating the view. Now, the last thing we need, oh, actually, so before I do this, we'll see it happen. So in my app, right here, before I update the view, I need to make sure that I actually have a current component. So I'm going to say, if there is a current component, then go ahead and set the HTML. But if there's not, we're just going to set it to not found. So we'll say this equals, we'll throw in like an H3, not found. Cool. And if we look at the actual template, each dog is a link to the dogs page with its specific ID. So now in the view, when we hover over it, you can see in the bottom right, it has that URL, but when we click on it, it's not found. So now we need to implement the individual dogs component. So let's do that. Right here, we're going to add a new component. So I'm going to say app.add_component. We're going to pass in an object. It has a name, which is going to be dog. It's going to have a model, which is just going to be an object that has a dog property. Initially, it's just an empty object. And it's also going to have a view that accepts the model as a parameter. And we have this handy-dandy dog template, so we can just use that. And we'll pass in model.dog. Now, the controller needs to make an API request for that specific dog. So pass in the model. We're going to say API.getDog. I'm just going to hard-code it with ID1 for now. Then we get back some result. And then because of our wonderful data binding, we're just going to say model.dog equals result.dog. Cool. Now I need to actually implement this getDog function. So in our API, getDog is going to be the very same thing, but we're going to be requesting a single dog. So let's throw this in there. Let's make this a template string, and we're going to throw the ID on the end of it. So now it's going to make a request for a single dog. The last thing we need to do is actually set up the specific route for this dog. So I'm going to add a route. It's going to be dog. And our regular expression is going to get a little messier. So we want dogs, dogs / some specific ID. So I'm going to say dogs / anything 0 through 9, any number of those, and that ends the string. So when the URL matches this regular expression, we will load the dog component. So now it broke. ID is not defined. Pass in the ID, of course. Okay, so now we click a specific dog, and we get a specific dog. But right now, it's hard-coded. So like if I click ID2, it's always going to get ID1. Right, but let's not hard-code it. Let's create some route params. So in our router, after we've found this specific route, if we execute this regular expression, we can pick out that specific number from the regular expression. So let's do that. This.params equals route.url. We're going to pass this as a new regular expression. Regex route.url. We're going to execute it on the current hash. And then we'll just log the params. And what this will do is it'll run that regular expression on the current URL, and it'll actually pull out the ID. So now that we're logging the params, we can see that the second parameter, the second value in that array is the actual ID. So now that we're setting the params, I know that index 1 is the actual ID, so I can use that in my component. So right here, I'm going to say router.params at 1. And so now we get dog with ID 1, we get dog with ID 2, and we get dog with ID 3. There you go. Awesome. So we've done it. We have written this completely from scratch, no framework, all vanilla JavaScript, no cheating. And I totally forgot to, deploy. Okay, easy enough. So if you guys haven't heard of Now, it's a fantastic deployment tool. You install it from the CLI, you literally hit Now, and we have now deployed. So give it a second. And we're on the internet! Wait, no. It works. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I had these cool little GIFs too, like, we got all the dogs! We got a single dog. We've deployed. They're together now. Yeah. All right. Get prepared for this wonderful, wonderful GIF. You just soak it in.
A what?
A GIF with a hard G. So, of course, I wrote this from scratch. It was fun. You got to see kind of like what's under the hood of these frameworks. But you might be asking the question, also, like, what just happened? Because that was a lot. Let's a quick review. So we made an app, we made a component, it had a model of Vue controller, we made a router, and we made an API. So the app had a few functions. You could add a component, you could show a component, and you could update the view with the latest value. A component had a model of Vue and a controller, and then our router allowed us to add a route and then just tapped into hash change so it could swap out the component based on the hash change. And then our API was just some simple API requests. But you might also be wondering, and also in conclusion, should you do this in production? And my answer to that is no. And so this is great. So on Jiffy, they have emoji GIFs. Like, so this is the don't GIF. Yeah, it's the don't emoji. Yeah. But frameworks exist for a reason, obviously. So like, you're not going to want to code this stuff from scratch every time. Obviously, I had no tests. Kyle's Ember app was tested like crazy. Every framework has built-in tests for like the framework itself, and they provide you a lot of value. So you're not going to be wanting to write this from scratch. But if you think back to kind of like the thought experiment, like, should you do this for fun? And my answer is yes, absolutely, definitely. I got more slides. I'm almost done. But ultimately, and I kind of alluded to this, but like when you're using a framework, when you're using something that looks like it's magic, try to think back to first principles. Like, you know how to write JavaScript. How did that framework, that person, how did they do that? How did they actually implement it? And you'll create something like this. I got some plugs, and then I'll take questions and stuff like that. The code is all here, git.io/vanillajs. Everything I just wrote is there. You can look at it. You can peruse it. I obviously prepared before this. The other thing is I wrote a simple MVC framework called c.js, and the tagline is a simple MVC framework that no one should use. And so it takes very similar principles to what I just did, but I also implemented like two-way data binding with an input. So we have change listeners on inputs. When they change, they update the model. So you can peruse the code and see how that was done. Lastly, there's a couple more things. I am giving a talk at Develop Denver, so if you're going to be there, check it out. I'm giving an overview of Vue Js. Yeah! As I said, I don't write everything from scratch. Vue Js is my favorite framework, and honestly, like, this style of writing it and implementing the components is very Vue inspired. Lastly, I'm the organizer of the Vue Js Meetup, so if you're interested in giving a full talk or a lightning talk, we're looking for speakers on the 28th and the 25th. Thank you so much!